There are two types of mysteries, or more accurately, there are two types of detective stories. The more familiar is the whodunit. This is the classic. Typically, a bad act has been committed. It is unclear who is responsible, and the whole point of the story is to figure out who done it. Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie, most police procedurals on television work this way. Who done it is the name for this type of mystery storytelling. The other kind of mystery or detective story is perhaps more literary, but surely no less interesting. In these cases, pun intended, we begin with the knowledge of the deed. From the start, we know quite well who done it. So in these stories, in these mysteries, we are aware of who is responsible, and thus the story shifts from who did what to why what was done was done. Columbo is the classic TV example, but in the ancient world, Sophocles, his story Oedipus Rex, is cherished for this type of telling, and the Russian writer Tolstoy is appreciated for employing this technique in Crime and Punishment. In these cases of the why done it, the tension and intensity of the investigation comes not from a surprise ending, for we know from the start how the story ends. The tension and intensity and significance of this story is derived from our learning what prompted the now already familiar outcome. These type of mysteries, detective stories, investigations, such a story of this type is appropriately called a why-done-it. I tell you this because this morning's reading from the prophet Micah is an example of a why-done-it. Micah's quote will be familiar. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? It is clear what God is saying here. We likely know this quote quite well. Some may even think of these words as a distillation or adequate summary of your own foundation of faith. Indeed, many of us, I count myself in this number, see our own aspirations in this short declarative statement, this seemingly simple articulation of faith. But why, we may ask, why did God decide to speak through the prophet Micah these words? Why did God say what God said? Why does God declare? What does the Lord require of you? Simply this: do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. What God said is clear. Why God said it is unanswered. And so let us consider the world in which the prophet Micah lived and prophesied, and in which he shared these words. Travel back with me some 2,800 years to the 8th century BCE. We are in ancient Israel, and the times of the day are uncertain and unstable. What was once thought to be normal, indeed moral, has given way to new norms and thus new realities. As it happens, religious life is intact and active, and people still profess their beliefs. But just outside the walls within which they gather, just beneath the surface of society, the world is at odds with itself. How so? In ancient Israel of the 8th century BCE, wealth and power have become concentrated in the hands of a very few, while far too many others are pushed into poverty. In ancient Israel, 2,800 years ago, the political and legal systems have been manipulated to favor the wealthy and powerful, and many leaders and many who held positions of authority were implicated in the corruption. The more things change. And while it is true that the people in the 8th century in ancient Israel continued to practice their religious faith, that is to say, they attended worship regularly, they offered sacrifices as instructed, and they professed their faith Well, faithfully, all was not well. You see, in the world of ancient Israel, rote performance had come to replace righteous behavior as false piety and mundane, repetitious rituals came to be the normative, familiar mode of religious expression. In essence, the prophet Micah was speaking at a time and addressing a community that was seemingly faithful, but was spiritually fractured, for their religion had been severed from ethics. The correct words were spoken, the required rituals were enacted, and yet these activities were effectively severed from any consideration about the world outside the walls. In effect, the performances they made were done in a vacuum. For insofar as outside, power was being used to exploit rather than to protect, and people were overlooked or forgotten or worse, and blind justice and basic kindness were treated as entitlements that came to a few rather than a requisite right for all. It was time for a reset. God done said what God done said. But why? Because it was time for a religious reset. Religion in that day had become too much about saying the right thing rather than doing the right thing. Religion had become too perfunctory and performative rather than purposeful and productive. And no longer was religion understood as a means of improving oneself and the world around us, rather than repeating what is familiar and routine. Religion in the prophet Micah's day, 2,800 years ago, had lost its way and needed to reorient itself. It needed to be reset, restated. And so it is for that reason why God said, "What is it that the Lord requires of you? To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk with humility beside your God." Because when justice is rendered selective and is treated as a privilege reserved for the few rather than a right owed to every person, because when kindness is extended only to those who resemble us or who meet a certain criteria, but is denied to others, while that same kindness is not extended to all. Because when humility gives way to hubris, wherein some see themselves as powerful or as perfect as God, religion risks being severed from the responsibility we all share for one another, simply because we have each been created in the divine image and we are each equal before our Creator. And so this is why God clarifies what is expected of us, offering a principled and purposeful and prophetic reminder that religion at its core is not about what we offer to God, but is rather about what we do for one another in God's name or with God's guidance. Thus, the divine reset. And therefore, Micah's familiar words about doing justice and loving kindness and walking with humility beside our God, these words are about how we practice and make real our faith as an expression of how we live with one another in the most godly of ways. Mystery solved.